with me this evening, on this Friday evening, I have the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin MacKenzie. Thank you for joining us. And the trade unionist and broadcaster, Paul Embery. Thanks to you too. I haven't seen you for a while.
No, it's
nice
been a while.
To see you.
Yeah, you too.
I used to sometimes do this slot for Jubes, but it's been a few months, I think. So it's nice to be back at this time of the evening. Now, you can get in touch with everything we're talking about this show. So gbviews@gbnews.com. As always, please do send in your messages. Or, of course, we're on Twitter, if you prefer, @GBNews. We do monitor those as well. Now, let's start with probably the biggest story of the week, the biggest tragedy, and also possibly the biggest injustice of the week. The Nottingham triple killer, Valdo Calocane's sentence could be referred to the Court of Appeal. That's after the Attorney General received a complaint arguing that the sentence just too lenient. We've also learned that Calocane may be eligible for release in just 3 years, could be eligible for release. Now, yesterday, Calocane was sentenced, of course, to a hospital order. That was for fatally stabbing 3 people, Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates. Now, the victims' families have been very vocal in criticising this sentence. Mr Webber's mother, Emma, accused the police of having blood on their hands, while Mr Coates' son, James, he says the killer got away with murder. So should there be an appeal? Kelvin, what do you make of this? Of course, diminished responsibility was the reason why he was given manslaughter and therefore a hospital order. Is that justice? And do you think this should go to the Court of Appeal?
To be honest with you, I think it's a very difficult legal area. The truth about the matter is that the CPS followed the guidelines, and the guidelines were quite clear that in the event, and there were 3 psychiatrists who said this, that he was suffering from severe psychosis, and therefore he couldn't be charged with murder. However, as the mother points out, in every other respect outside the psychosis, this was a planned killing. He went and bought he bought the weapons to do the killing. He lay in waiting. Right, this was all pre-planned. The issue, there is one other issue that emerges in all this, which is quite serious. That if, in the event, under the treatment of the hospital order, this killer can actually end up, if he turns out to be, quotes, cured, unquotes, of his psychosis, he could, in fact, bizarrely, not have to serve his sentence in a jail. And the other issue that emerges with this particular guy is that his psychosis is triggered off when he doesn't take the drugs. So supposing he decides to take the drugs now because he's a cunning killer, supposing he decides to take the drugs in the hospital, gets, quotes, cured, can he then walk after 3 years? And this is a mistake, almost certainly a mistake by the judge in one of the orders. So I think you're going to find that when the Attorney General revisits this and sends this back to the Court of Appeal, that I think that particular alleyway will be blocked.
Well, Paul, that's not actually that far-fetched, is it? He could take his medicine. He could appear to be well enough to be back in the community and then could pose a threat in the future. It could happen.
It's a horrendous crime, Emily, but I do think we need to be careful about assuming that we know better than the medical professionals. I mean, I have to say, I largely agree with Kelvin. You had, in fact, it was 4 psychiatrists. They went to the unusual step of getting a 4th psychiatrist, medical expert, and they all agreed with each other. And they all said, actually, this guy is a paranoid schizophrenic. He was suffering from a mental health episode, psychosis, when he carried out these wicked acts. And consequently, you know, we cannot treat it as a straightforward murder, a callous, cold-blooded murder, in the way that we would other callous, cold-blooded murders. And that's very, very difficult for the parents to swallow, the family to swallow, completely understandably. I think if it was a member of my family who was a victim, you would want to rail against that. You would want to protest. You would want to say, look, this is unfair, it's unjust, this man must be sent to prison for the rest of his life. But actually, you do have to defer to the medical experts on stuff like this. And I cannot believe that 4 qualified psychiatrists would have come to exactly the same conclusion in terms of that particular killer's mental health, and unless there was really something in it.
Yeah, I completely take your point, but they're experts in their field. They're not thinking about justice and it is the victims' families who will, in many ways, serve a life sentence. We've heard multiple times from the brother of Grace O'Malley Kumar, and distraught is an understatement.
Yeah, it's true, and so it's difficult for, you know, people in a television studio trying to encapsulate the emotion of somebody being simply coming home in the early hours to their university settings and losing their life, and the family then getting a phone call which says, well, instead of getting a 2-1, I'm afraid your child is now dead. And the most worrying aspect of all this is, OK, so it's the CPS who made up the mind on this. So this was East Midland CPS. On a crime of this size, and I'm not trying to be rural about it or suburban about it, is it entirely the decision of the East Midland CPS to decide what should happen when the crime is as large as this? Shouldn't this go up to the equivalent? After all, Starmer was the DPP. Should it go up to somebody like at the top of the tree rather than somebody at the bottom? Look, or midway. Look, I do understand there are rules about this stuff, and I think they followed the rules. That isn't going to make the parents any happier.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's law versus justice in some cases, or appears to be in this kind of case. Dave, he's saying every law seems to favour the criminal. Are we thinking too much about the criminal and the fact he had this mental disorder, and whether the victims' families feel a sense of justice? Is that more important, even in theory? I know, obviously, we operate under a legal system.
But we're not thinking just about the criminal if it's backed up by by medical evidence. If the medical evidence is such that they were right, the psychiatrists, and I think we accept that they are, then it's not a question of not getting justice. You can't send someone to a prison and you can't convict them of murder if you've got overwhelming medical evidence saying that at the time they committed the acts, they were not in control of themselves.
Do you think the victims'
and therefore it wasn't
OK,
murder.
right. So here's one other point. If somebody who is suffering from that kind of psychosis deliberately chooses not to take the drug, this is a decision. And the reason they don't take it is because it changes them, and they don't like being changed. Yeah. This happens in a lot of areas. My question is, are you then guilty, right, of a different crime than if you were taking the drugs and then you carried out the crime?
I think if you knew that you were likely to commit a heinous act as a result of not taking the drugs,
which he would have known,
then I think there is some argument to say such was the personal negligence that actually you should be culpable, whether it's murder or something else. But I guess, and I don't know, but I guess that the guy didn't realise that in not taking the drug, he was likely to commit these sort of murders.
Well, actually, when you look into his background...
Kelvin, I don't know if you would ever be able to...
Right, well, when you look into his background, he had a shocking background. I mean, on the estate he lived in, every so often, for some reason not clear to anybody, he would go and smash down their door. Can you imagine what that was like?
It's also emerged that he assaulted 2 people only weeks before he went on to kill these 3 people.
And he
wasn't arrested.
And he was a regular user of cannabis, and we can't ignore that in this discussion. And in fact, Jacob Rees-Mogg, I think, raised it on his show last night, where he said, actually, such was the person's use of cannabis, and we know that there is these days, we know there's evidence showing a correlation between excessive cannabis use and mental health disorders.
Yes,
and I do think that question needs to be examined. I think we need to look at that.
The liberalisation, it's becoming more fashionable to talk about liberalisation, decriminalisation of drugs. Perhaps these sorts of issues haven't been taken.
Well, I tell you what, even round my way, in Weybridge in Surrey, honestly, I walked through an absolute fog of the stuff the other night. It was unbelievable.
Horrible,
and the girl, or actually was a girl, because I think she was about 18, right, who was using it, right, was simply smoking outside the station. I mean, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people walking by. Nobody gave a stuff. It was incredible.
There was a car parked outside where I live all night one evening, and they were all there with those balloons. Whatever they are.
It's been decriminalised, hasn't it?
Yeah, it essentially has.
Essentially, it's been decriminalised.
In a lot of the country.
And the biggest myth which you hear in political argument very often in this country is that the war on drugs has failed. Actually, when you look at cannabis, in reality, there hasn't been a war on drugs for many years. People are essentially free to take it, and they know they're free to take it.